As you build out your level, there are a couple of organizational things to keep in mind. One is that as you duplicate and move objects around, you're going to begin filling up the hierarchy here. And one thing you can do is to create empty objects that then become your groups. So that's what I've done for the lights here and the pipes. Well, let's go ahead and do that for the antenna here as well. So I'm going to right click and choose Create Empty. And that creates an empty game object. Now it's created it underneath that antenna. So I'm going to click and drag it up out of that group there. And I'm going to rename this antenna. And I will then take these objects here and drag them into that group right there. So they then become a part of this antenna group. Also, as you build out the scene, remember that there are a couple of different ways that you can move around or move an object around. Let's take a look at this curved pipe over here. Now, currently we have it set so we can see the pivot point of the object. The pivot point came from Blender. If I change this, it will change it to the center of the geometry. So I usually want to keep it to the pivot point. You can also move things in either local axis here or in global here. So you can see how the gizmo changes when you change it from global to local. So one of the things I like to do, say if I'm going to duplicate this and move it over here, I'll press Control or Command D, and I'll move it across the scene in global mode. And then to tweak it and get it in place, I'll then change it to local mode so that I can move it around based on its local axes. So for this, maybe I would just move this in and down some and maybe rotate it a bit to get it in place here on the building. So to test my scene, I need to be able to run around it in game mode and see how it looks. So if I hit play now, what happens is that I just fall right through the game level and keep on falling. So what I need to do is create a collider for the pathways so I don't fall through. So I'll select the pathway, choose Add Component over here in the inspector, and we'll choose Physics. And since this is an oddly shaped piece, I'll choose Mesh Collider. And that adds a collider component to that object. So now if I hit play, I don't fall through, and I can hit the W key and move around and move the mouse around to see the environment. Now if I go toward one of these buildings, I'll go right through the building and then fall through again. So what we need to do is create colliders for these buildings as well. And there are a lot of them. I could go through here and select each one and click Add Component, Physics, and I'd create a capsule collider for each one. But that would be kind of tedious. What you can do is come over here to our buildings group, and I'm going to select this first building and then drag select all the way down to the last building, and I can add colliders to all of these all at once. But the one thing I need to figure out is how big and in what direction the collider is going to be aligned. So let me just select this one here, and let's add a collider to it and use that setting for all the rest. So I'm going to click Add Component, Physics, and I'm going to choose a capsule collider. Now if I use the height field here, I'm just going to click and drag on the height. You can see that the collider is actually aligned in the wrong direction. So what I need to do is change from y-axis to z-axis, and then I can bring the height down to about there. And that looks like a pretty good fit around the object. So what we need is z-axis and 0.12. Okay, so I'm going to remove this component right here. I'm going to select all of my buildings. I'll select that one, shift select the top one. So now I have all of the buildings selected. I'll go to Add Component, Physics, and Capsule Collider. I'll change to the Z-axis, and in the height, what did we say? 0.12, I believe. And there we go. So now all of the buildings have a collider, and I shouldn't be able to run through them. Let's give it a try. I'm going to hit play and move forward into one of these buildings over here. And there we go. We can't go through it. Another thing I wanted to mention was about the materials here. I've created new materials just by right-clicking and going to Create Material. And for each one of these, I've dragged in seamless textures and their normal maps. So over here, all I've done is just in the textures, just dragged in the color to the albedo and the normal to the normal map. And then once those materials are created, I can then drag a new material onto an object once I can see it in the scene here. So let's say this object here, I wanted to be a different texture. Maybe it's too similar to this one up here. I could just take this building base material that I've created and just drag it straight on and try that one. Or maybe this one. Or that one. So once you get your materials built with the appropriate textures and normal maps, you can then just use those materials to test different looks for your scene. All right, well, in the next video, we'll begin working on the terrain that we'll be able to see outside of our environment.